All right, welcome. Today we have another lesson, Yippee-ki-yay. And today we're going to talk about doing versus thinking versus feeling and what actually means to have being. And so a lot of the times when we hear advice, we'll hear things where people will say, you just need to let go when it's forgiveness, or they'll say you just need to be positive. Or another one is that I hear a lot is love yourself. Oh my God, this one, like love yourself. And we'll oftentimes, like when we hear that, there'll be this question of like, okay, what does that mean to love yourself? Is that something you do? Is that just the way you think? Or is that how you feel about yourself? And oftentimes, it'll be misinterpreted one way or another that we're not doing those things. So as a result, we have a hard time applying whatever for basic A advice this is, whether it's let go, be positive, love yourself, be peaceful, whatever, stupid stuff we hear. And you heard plenty of stupid stuff from me, you guys can decide. But it's like, ultimately, what does any of that mean, right? And as I've come to understand it, and as I've come to find and see peace in my life, this is the operative aspect that I want to talk about today. What does being mean, and how do we actually settle into that? So let's break that down and really get focused up on what it means to be versus to do, right? So a little story time. Something that I've been feeling personally, like in my own journey right now, is I have this tendency to always try to earn things, right? So earning equals basically a sense of having to prove myself. And that's ultimately coming down to one of the twin terrors, right? So the twin terrors are two essential reasons why every human being struggles, right? If a human being or an argument or something is happening with you or you're struggling, it's coming down to one of these two things. It's either that, and the twin terrors are really simple. You don't feel like you're not good enough, and that you won't be loved. Those are it. That's pretty much it. Like, you can take every single complex diagnosis, disorder, difficulty, everything you run into a human being comes down to one of these two or both of these twin terrors mixing in some kind of strange concoction. Essentially, everything comes down to not feeling like you're good enough or feeling like you won't be loved. And you would say, okay, well, then that's simple. In order to help people feel that, you have to help them feel that they're going to be loved, to love people, right? And then feeling like you're not good enough. This is one of the trickier ones, right? So feeling like you won't be loved, this twin terror is based in feminine energy, right? And feeling like you won't be loved, the actual solution to this is not actually to receive love, it's to give love, right? Because when you give love, and you're really able to understand what that means, it has a tendency to purify yourself. And when you're able to give love, you understand its nature, you recognize that you are love, and then you step into that full sense of being, right? This is the feminine aspect coming online, healing. So this is how you're going to feel loved. But the masculine aspect, in human sense, this is different, right? So not good enough. This is going to come from even me, like as a man, I'm still struggling with this, but as I've come to understand, right, how we work through not feeling good enough is we have to see evidence that we are accepted or loved. So the idea is like feeling like you won't be loved. How you take care of that is by loving other people. And then feeling like you're good enough is by accepting that love, right? Accepting the love others have for you, right? And then when you're able to do that, you heal both the twin terrors, right? Now, obviously, it's not all at once where you just am like, oh, I feel like I'm loved and I love people and that's it. And you might say like, well, I feel like I'm loved and good enough and I'm all that, like I feel that. But like, do you feel that for everyone? Do you feel love for every single person, right? Do you feel loved and accepted by every single person, even if they don't know they accept you? That's a really tough place to get to. And that's why we're going to spend our whole life basically working out these two twin terrors, learning how to love people and learning how to feel loved, right? Because I feel like this coming from feeling like you're good enough, really, if I'm being honest, it comes from a belief and understanding of the divine, God, or just the universe. Doesn't really matter. I'm not talking in a religious sense. I'm especially not talking in a religious sense. Religion really preys on this twin terror, not feeling like you're good enough. They're really big on that. So the core emotions here are shame, and like you won't be loved. Yeah, this is shame. That's at the very bottom of the Hawkins scale, right? So we see here at the bottom, this is where the twin terrors lie. And those people are dealing with one or both in abundance in as many aspects of their life. So in order to rise above that, we eventually have to get past the threshold of courage. And then when we get past the threshold of courage, then we can step into the mental, which is based in our thinking, right? And then we can start coming up with correct mental constructs to understand the world around us within the framework of I can be loved and that I am good enough, right? So then once you start understanding those and you start thinking it enough, eventually the feelings of I am good enough begin to get revealed. I'm good enough, I am loved. Now the reason we need to start from the bottom all the way up to the top is not because it's actually circular. In reality, when you were a kid, you felt loved and good enough, right? A good example is like when you were pooping and peeing and completely useless as a child, like little babies, fairly useless, right? But they have so much power and they have so much control. Like a little baby comes into a room, they cry and they whine, everyone pays attention to them. Why? Because they are good enough and they are loved. Just for being a baby. Just for being a baby. You see that? They're just being a baby. Baby doesn't have to do anything. Baby doesn't have to think anything. Baby doesn't have to produce anything. They're just being a baby, being. And in that sense, they were loved. And obviously, if they were not given that love and care as a baby, in any level of consistent manner, most of the time they won't survive, right? We'll see that even when babies are born, a lot of the time, if they don't even have skin-to-skin contact with their mothers, they can die because they're not getting that physical reassurance, because human beings were programmed to have that assurance. And when we don't have that, we begin to feel that separation, that death of our spirits, right? And so this earning comes from losing this identity of being loved for being, right? And that's because that focus is going from an internal focus, which is internal, is top down. We move to an external focus, which is bottom up, right? So bottom up is external, and this is internal. Now, in order to live as we are meant to be, when you feel like I am good enough and I am loved, right? Remember, you're living by third degree law, which is just based in three simple principles: justice, grace, and mercy. right? So justice is like everything comes around, goes around, comes back around, right? It's that loop of feedback and give. Grace is that little bit of space in between, and mercy is being able to let things go or allow things because it's in conjunction with the whole plan. And that's made possible through grace. But the only way we receive that in our lives or in our senses is this sense of Godhood or divinity. When you're a baby is emulated by your parents. Your parents are essentially these giants, right, that are taking care of you. You know, when you cry, they give you food. When you're dirty, they clean you. They just give you what you need without asking. But then as we begin to grow in our capacity in the physical plane, so as the external, we grow in the external, internally we begin to become diminished, right? Because what's happening is now we are no longer children of gods, right? We are slowly, without knowing it, becoming gods ourselves. But when you don't remember that, if you don't know who you are, then you begin to get disconnected. And so your focus drops from an internal focus to an external one. And then you start dropping into shame. Because, you know, when you were a baby, you could cry and, you know, get food or whatever. But then once you get 4 or 5 years old, they're like, hey, no, go feed yourself or go take care of yourself or whatever. Or they start trying to tell you and they start having expectations. They start saying here are things you need to do because now you're in a physical reality. You're no longer in just feelings, right? You're no longer in the spirit realm. Because your faculties of the mental are beginning to click online. And so this is where we move from spirit into mentality as we're growing. And then finally, we get grounded in quote unquote, let's do another one. We get grounded in quote unquote reality down here. In reality. This is reality down here. Down here, physical reality. We get grounded in that. And so because we get grounded, now we're sitting in this pit of shame where you have to perform in school. You have to do things based off of what is required, not because of who you are. And then suddenly we're trying to make ourselves fit in things that aren't necessarily built for us, but we need to start adapting to them. And so we begin to lose ourselves. And we lose ourselves because we go from this identity of feeling like we were good enough to like now we are not good enough and that we won't be loved if we don't do these things. Where people will reject us and tell us that we're no longer wanted if we don't fit into these systems. So slowly but surely we begin to lose ourselves and we move away from feeling like we're good enough, feeling away from feeling like we're loved. And we move into this paradigm where we are ruled by the twin terrors and we become externally motivated instead of internally focused. And so the journey, we as we're waking up and growing into ourselves and stepping into a higher, mature place, is how do we confront these twin terrors and get back to this place of internal alignment, understanding the nature of reality. So to do that, there's a couple of things we want to do. So first, let's get rid of all this. Hope all of this is clear so far. But this is core stuff, guys. It's understanding that the focus is how we clear things. So this is one thing. I'm going to explain this mechanic, and it's important in understanding this mechanic, how the rest of everything we're going through works. And that is simply this. All reality is spiritual reality. So all reality is spirit. So the fundamental vibrationary function of the universe is that things start as spirit. They trickle down into thoughts or ideas. And then they manifest into physical reality. And this process of going from spirit into physical reality is, you can just designate it as creation. This is how everything is created. And you might be like, well, what do you mean? Like, prove that. Well, write a book, right? And you'll see that first it starts with the feeling and the idea of a spirit, just a feeling. then you'll start having thoughts or ideas about this book. And then through the efforts and through your actions right here, they come down here. So when something moves from spirit to thoughts, now you'll have feelings, or we'll call it inspiration. And then you have thoughts, ideas that are interpreted through that. And then through physical reality, what that then happens is it creates this feedback loop. Because what happens is this is the fundamental creationist paradox. But what happens when it loops back around is humanity is we create intention based off of what we observe, right? So this is what you would call co-creation. So when you have co-creation and intention, what happens is you very fine spirit as a baby. I'm good enough, this happens. But then you interface with physical reality. And we realize that there's a grace period, right? So we'll take a grace here, where things that are in spiritual reality don't always all match the physical reality. So you would say most of reality, let's say 80% of it's happening here, 18% of it is happening here, and yes, only about 2% of reality is happening in physical reality. So it takes time. You're only really seeing physical reality that functions more like a shadow. And just like if you want to move something, if you want to move a shadow, like I move the shadow, like you guys can see my shadow on this whiteboard. But if I want to move the shadow, I don't move the shadow by trying to interact with the shadow, because the shadow is the effect. I have to interact with the cause, which is my hand, the eraser, against the light. And that's sort of like how reality is created. So if you could think about it, spirit is like the light, thoughts and ideas are like the physical objects, and then physical reality is the shadow, which is cast on the board. And so this is a real life example of sort of how reality works. And so the issue is that when you are convinced that the shadow is reality, what happens is you cut out 98% of reality. You're not even acknowledging that. So what happens is now you go into this reductive feedback loop where this 2% gets recycled back. And so now you're only working with 2% of the original material. And then of that 2%, 80% gets filtered out, 18% gets filtered out, and then you get another 2%. And that stuff, because you're only taking and focusing on what's happening in physical reality, you're usually getting the dense matter. And dense matter are things like failure, struggle, pain, fear. It's only as we hold on to the original idea, that original 100% that originated in spirit, that inspiration, the ideas that stuck with it, and then we align our actions with that, that eventually physical reality catches up with what we've perceived in the spirit. And that's because that window of grace begins to thin and get closer. So then suddenly we see this feedback loop works for our positive, and then instead of turning into this reductive 2%, we have this 100%. But this 100% though is infinite, right? So it's actually not really 100%, it's infinite because it's spirit. It's connected to everything else. So then we have this spiral. And this is where, once again, once you get past the threshold of courage, in the Hawkins scale, everything opens up and expands. But if you don't, everything compresses and creates tension at the bottom, which is where shame resides, right? So I don't know if all of that makes sense. Basically, in order to have co-creation, we have to spiral up and we have to focus on the positive feelings and the inspiration, and we have to move past the threshold of courage, right? Now, in order to do this, this starts with a feeling or an inspiration. But you might be like, well, frick, like I'm so deep in it, how the hell do I do that? because I can't feel inspired or happy or anything because I'm so far down here. And so this is where we want to talk about direction and not destination. So it's not about where you are, it's about what direction you're pointed in. And that is the focus of what we're going to make today. But I was explaining all that because you have to understand all those mechanics to understand how to move from a place of doing or being to getting where you want to be. So this is going back to the same map that we've done literally in every single video, where we talk about moving at a 7th degree law, which is, complexity and confusion. So complexity and confusion here. And that, grows and goes in, not even infinitely because it just gets reduced, but yes, it is infinite in the sense that you can always just keep dividing smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. So this is where you feel negative emotions. And I say negative with quotes, right? Because once again, this is all relative, which you're going to see here in a second. And then over here, we have higher degree law. So at the very highest degree, we have 1st degree, which is basically pure, unadulterated love, which is also infinite. Right? And it's moving here, and this is positive emotions. Positive, because once again, this is all relative, right? For some people, feeling love can be a painful experience. And for a lot of people, if you don't have the mental frameworks, it is. And so, in between this, you have the basis where here in 7th degree law, so starting from left to right, here we're doing the Hawkins scale, but we're doing it side by side, right? So here, you have shame, guilt, apathy. Then closer you get things like anger, pride. Then eventually you'll get to here when you have the courage threshold, where you start feeling positive emotion and negative emotion less. You'll move through the mental plane, So this is reasoning, neutrality, willingness, where you're getting by. And this is where most people, like when they're succeeding or being, this is like where they're going. This is the independence, right? But it's not true independence because that's not real. But it's where a lot of people settle and think, hey, I made it. Then after up here, you get into the positive emotions where you start feeling interdependence. Divine cooperation. Joy, love, peace, things like that. And the biggest thing is you have faith because you no longer have fear. So things like fear, which is way down here, you can feel them, but they no longer dominate your principles or how you live. So you still feel fear, but you don't necessarily let fear dictate your actions or the way you think or move. And so, in order to get from here to here, everything we've talked about in terms of these are feelings, first and foremost, right? So you have to start here with the feelings. And you might be like, well, what do you mean? I can't feel you can't feel joy, love, and peace when you're stuck down here in fear. You can't. So what I would say then is, starting with your feelings, let's then move on to your thinking. Move on to your thinking. What kind of thoughts are you thinking? Are you thinking, I hate myself, God, I can't stand my family? Like, what are you thinking? What are your thoughts, right? Then after that, let's focus on what's happening in your physical reality or your actions. So right now, you're most of the time trying to do this feedback loop. You're trying to do this feedback loop where if I change my actions, then I can change my thoughts. And if I change my thoughts, then I can change my feelings. Now, if you have pure masculine consciousness, you can absolutely do that. That is done through pure masculine intelligence. And that is the primary energy that is doing that. Very few people have that level of consciousness, though. And usually, if you're at that level where you're that smart of consciousness and you fell into this pit, this is where they say smart people oftentimes are really depressed or whatever. It's oftentimes because you have an excess of intelligence and not enough matter or vibration. And that's based in the feelings, that's the feminine, right? And usually it's that divorce from the feminine through intelligence, why you got stuck in that hole. That's like what it is. Because it's going back to those twin terrors. So you have to ask yourself, am I struggling with not feeling like I'm good enough, or am I struggling with not feeling loved? Because remember, the part of to feel good enough, you have to allow others to love you. To feel like you are loved, you have to love other people. So it's really about making one of those two decisions. And you might be like, Oni, is it that simple? Yeah, it's that simple. Just decide, I'm not going to love people, or I'm going to accept people's love. It's that simple. Make that one or both of those decisions. If you start accepting people's love and you decide to love people, you'll be well on your way right up that scale. And you're going to notice that by making the decision, or by wanting to make the decision, because if you got this far in the video, it means at some point in this level you are capable of making this decision. Most people who aren't capable could not listen this long or stay this focused. So a lot of it is just making the decision that you want to love people and that you want to be loved by people. And then when that happens, is then I'll be thinking about what does that look like? And this is where we can talk about the laws and degrees in between. Because we're trying to get into first degree law and move out of seventh degree law. So it's really just down from making these one or two decisions, right? But then as we move up the scale from sixth to fifth to fourth to third to second degree law, we begin to have less complexity and more simplicity and clarity. And at each level, there's going to be different steps. So if you're like, well, what's a framework that I could use to understand how to love people or to accept people's love? Honestly, there's a lot of them. I would say at sixth degree, you just need to understand the 12 steps. And that's where I would recommend the Alcoholics Anonymous 12-step program. And it's not just for people who do alcohol, it's also for people who have been addicted to negative feelings and the negative way of life. So applying all those steps for yourself and then understanding universal law. If you're stuck in seventh degree consciousness, this is the next step for you. Learn how to do those Alcoholics Anonymous steps and apply universal law. And you'll be well on your way. And everything else, all the nuances will figure themselves out. It's going to be specific for every situation. But ultimately, if you want to move from here to here, the roadmap is quite simple, right? You just need to move up the scale. And you move up the scale by moving out of these set of laws and moving into these set of laws. And once you start living by these set of laws, they'll simplify. And then when you have a mastery or an understanding of these laws, you move on to fifth degree law. And then when you have an understanding of fifth degree law, you move on to a fourth degree law. Then when you have an understanding of fourth degree law, you move into third degree law. And then by the time you get to third degree law, you will be in alignment with who you are as a human being. Because human beings are third degree beings. So when you're a human being and you get to third degree, you're going to be well on your way. and you're gonna know just as much, if not more, than I do. So that is really it. And that's how we move from being, thinking, that's why we move from doing, thinking, and feeling into being, by just following these set of steps and instructions. So decide that you want to love people, and decide that you want to accept people's love. Now, if you're having a hard time doing that, decide that you want to do it for yourself. If you have nothing else, decide for yourself. Decide that I'm going to love myself, and decide that I'm going to accept my own love. And then the rest will take care of itself. And if you need somebody else to project onto, find someone to love, find someone to let love you. There's opportunities if you're open to them, but make the decision, and the rest will happen. All right, stay happy, stay healthy. Peace.